Well, we are just over a month away from a federal budget finally being tabled, but if today's report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer is any indication, it's not going to be a pretty picture when it comes to red ink. A deficit last year that was just over $50 billion, pushing now $70 billion, 68.5. That's not even factoring in what is promised in terms of some big new defense spending. Debt to GDP ratio is going in the wrong direction. So joining us to talk about what this report tells us and how the federal government maybe needs to respond. Very pleased to welcome to the program here Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, taxpayer.com. Franco, thank you so much for joining us here.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me on, man.
Like I say, not a pretty picture in this report, but at least, gives us a bit of a warning of what we're dealing with, maybe, an opportunity here to try to get ahead of this. But what stands out to you, first of all?
Well, I just got to say, this is a really bad picture, right? This is really, really bad. And I'm really worried about this, Rob, right? You mentioned the massive deficit, almost $70 billion this year. The government is borrowing tens of billions of dollars every single year. And one of the biggest worrying signs that I see is actually the debt interest charges, and not just how much it's costing us today, where this year debt interest charges will blow a $55 billion hole in the government's budget. Right, that's more than $1 billion every week. Well, Rob, what's $1 billion? That's a brand new hospital that isn't getting built every week across Canada because of these interest charges. But if you look at the forecast from the PBO down the road, interest charges are going to hit $82 billion in 2030. We're talking about the alarm bells need to be ringing in the Prime Minister's office, because this report shows just how bad of a situation we're in right now.
Well, and to put that in perspective, to talk about how much debt's accumulating and what we pay every year just to service that debt, what we saw under Justin Trudeau was a considerable amount of borrowing and a rise in that debt. But based on this report, we might blow past that in just the next 4 years here.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Let's go back to the Trudeau era for just a quick second. When he first became Prime Minister, the debt stood around $616 billion. In a matter of 10 years, it doubled, more than doubled, to now we're looking at about 1.3 trillion. So think about that, right? All of the years of Canada's history leading up to 2015, the government racked up 600 billion. In 10 years, the Trudeau government doubled that to 600 billion. Now, the concerning part moving forward is this. So I think it's fair to say that Carney, sold Canadians during the last election on this idea that he was different than the former Prime Minister. Well, if you look at the debt, he is different than the former Prime Minister. He's actually worse, according to everything that we know right now. Look, the PBO report shows that Carney is going to add $255 billion to the debt over the next 4 years. That's about $100 billion more than what even Trudeau was planning to do.
Yeah. And I mentioned that, this debt to GDP ratio, which the government has held up as, to say, hey, don't worry too much about all this borrowing and these deficits. They could at least point to that and say that was declining, but that's no longer the case here, is it?
No, it's going up, right? It's projected to increase from 42, 41% to 43% and essentially stay there. And what's really worrying about that is that you're seeing the debt make up more and more of our economy. And Rob, I don't need to tell you, what happens with this prolonged trade war that goes on. What happens if we enter a recession, right? A bad one. Well, then our debt just spirals out of control. And we've seen this song and dance happen before in Canada, where we've been put in a really bad spot. And this is why I always say, look, the best time to put out a fire is when it's just smoking, right? You don't wait for that smoke to then engulf the entire kitchen. That's when you're in a really bad spot. And I think if Mr. Carney doesn't get serious about righting past wrongs, if he keeps borrowing, if he keeps spending, we're in for a world of pain here in Canada.
Well, it's interesting the way they're framing this budget, and it sort of speaks to some budget maneuvering maybe that this prime minister is going to do and try to separate operational and capital spending, this idea that we can somehow have both austerity and investment. What do you make of those signals here?
Well, you can't. And look, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we've been very critical of, former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the way that he was spending, right? A lot of people have, and we were definitely one of them. But look, the problem with Trudeau's budget wasn't how the budget was laid out. right? There's long-standing principles that the government of Canada uses to account for capital spending in its budget every year. Like, that wasn't the problem with Trudeau's budgeting. The problem, if I could just be so blunt, was the debt-fueled spending spree, right? Before the pandemic, when the government was spending all-time highs, even after accounting for inflation and population growth, then the massive increase of spending, including non-COVID related things during the pandemic, and then after the pandemic. So that was the main problem that Trudeau's budgets had, was the out of control spending. It wasn't, how the budget was laid out or what they're calling spending, operating, or capital. That was not the problem.
So what does this government need to look at? Because as you say, there's been all kinds of spending increases. There's plenty of places I would imagine they could start here, but what's the course of action that's necessary here, do you think?
Well, number one, we've heard a lot about this spending review, but it's very narrow. It doesn't focus on the entire budget. And after a decade of out of control spending, finding savings in every area of the budget should be like finding water in the ocean. Like, we actually have to look at every single area of spending. Nothing should be left off the table. Number two, let's talk a little bit about the waste, some of the infuriating stuff, right? $100,000 studying the life of a grocery cart, an $8 million barn at Rideau Hall. Like, that's the infuriating stuff. But what the government actually has to look at is the bigger cost items. And the number one cost on day-to-day spending is the bureaucracy. There's just no way around it, right? The government added 99,000 extra bureaucrats in a decade, ballooned the cost of the bureaucracy 77% since 2016, right? It's consuming 55% of the operating budget. So there's no way around it. The Carney government has to fire some bureaucrats.
What about on the revenue side? I mean, the Carney government did come in and they eliminated the consumer carbon tax, although that wasn't necessarily going into general revenue. They backed away on the capital gains tax changes. But I just wonder, I mean, the situation I think would probably preclude this government from going any further with some needed tax reform. But what about the concern maybe that things go the other way, that this government looks at the revenue side as opposed to the spending side?
Well, that's a tale as old as history, right? When governments go massively into debt, when they run up these huge deficits, that's always the big concern, that politicians start to flip over all of the couch cushions looking for new ways to take more of your money. You mentioned the capital gains tax hike. Well, the capital gains tax hike came along, A, as a political wedge, right? They tried to wedge the opposition party on it. But B, it was also a way to try to paper over their massive spending spree. So this is always a concern. Rob, let me just go back a little bit to our conversation we just had earlier about debt to GDP, right? With all of the economic issues that we're facing, the Carney government can't be raising taxes, right? Like, let's look at the International Tax Competitiveness Index that compares 38 OECD countries. We're ranked 31st out of 38 on individual tax competitiveness. That's awful. We're ranked 26th, on business tax competitiveness. Again, awful. We're ranked behind the United States on both measures. So we got to grow the economy, and that definitely means no tax hikes.
Well, November 4th is Budget Day. We'll see what the government has in store and whether they take anything from this report here and these warnings. Much more is mentioned, taxpayer.com. Franco, thank you so much for making some time for us here.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, folks, thanks for watching and listening. You can find us at robbreakenridge.ca. Also, make sure you hit that subscribe button below and stay connected with The Rob Breakenridge Show.